has for as long as I can remember. She lives there with Luca, her son, for those of you who have met. So yeah, like Kristen said, when I heard the theme for the summer, I was like, my aunt I know has totally gone all in and moved across the world for Jesus, and so.
And did you have to think very hard to not call me B? Can't be.
Yeah.
Aww. Same Bonnie, I'm sure it felt really strange.
Yay, let's give him a hand, guys.
Well, I've heard you guys have had some great speakers. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I think we can. Can you guys all hear back there? No, maybe we should turn the mic on. Oh yeah, perfect.
I heard you had some great speakers, and I think that's really cool that your youth leaders have asked people to come from all different walks of life and places to talk to you. I remember when I was growing up in church, if we had missionaries come, it would be ladies in buns and no makeup and these really long, dowdy skirts on, and I never, ever in my wildest dreams thought that I would be a missionary. I thought that must be the most boring existence. So what I'm doing now was not something I ever planned or thought of. It was like a total surprise to me. But I'm just going to tell you a little bit about about my walk and how I got to where I am now. I was baptized as a teenager, but when people would talk about knowing God or about loving God, I was totally mystified. I did not know how you could love somebody that you couldn't see. And I also had a lot of doubts. Like at that point in time, evolution was kind of coming, it was new, and it seemed like to me that evolution disproved God being the creator of the universe. And so for a long time, I was what you might call a fence sitter. Have you ever heard that expression? Sitting on the fence? Or maybe you might have heard it being called being a lukewarm Christian. But being lukewarm left me really dissatisfied. And I got really sick of doubting. I wanted to be all or nothing. And so I began to pray that, well, no, it wasn't at that point that I did that yet, sorry. Several times I drifted to the nothing side. And the timing of one of those instances was really poor because I was on a summer mission trip. But there were several times when I really began to doubt that God was real. But when I really let myself totally just go to that side at one time, because I thought, okay, I'm going to really go all the way with this. I'm going to just let myself believe that God's not even real. That was terrifying to me. So at that point, I began to pray that I would really know God and would learn how to love Him. And God answered my prayer through a series of people and events. I moved to New York City, and I joined a church with a really good pastor that led us on an in-depth study of the Bible. And I met people whose lives had been radically changed by God. And I forced myself to do things that really stretched me, like going out and talking to people on the street about Jesus, which terrified me at the beginning. And then my love for travel and adventure led me to take a job in Korea, teaching at an international Christian school. That was about 16 years ago. And while I was in Korea, a group from my church went to Cambodia to help a Korean missionary. And we taught English to a bunch of kids who lived in a slum on the outskirts of Phnom Penh, and my heart was just broken by some of the stories of those kids. There was one guy in our class who was 16 years old who had never been to school because his parents didn't have enough money to buy a uniform and school supplies. And he was so hungry to learn and so grateful for us teaching him English that week. The schools in Cambodia are really in bad shape because some of you may know that there was a civil war there in the 1970s, and most of the educated people were killed. So even today, the public schools only run for 4 hours. They, like, for example, if you're in elementary school, you go 4 hours in the morning, and then another bunch of kids will come in and go for 4 hours in the afternoon. So you can imagine the kind of education you would get in 4 hours. Their history textbooks in high school are about that big. And teachers only get paid about $40 a month, and a lot of them are corrupt and take bribes. You have to pay for getting a good grade. So I went back to Korea after that 1 week, and I began to sense that God wanted me there in Cambodia. So that meant that I would have to raise support, and I hated the idea of that. So I prayed and I started to share my vision with other people, and even before I told people for sure that I was going, I had 6 people, just after I would share, hey, I think God may be leading me to Cambodia, 6 people said to me, hey, we'd really love to support you if you do that. So God just began to confirm to me in lots of different ways that that's what he wanted me to do. So I went back to the States and I went through missionary training. And then after 9 months, I was ready to go to Cambodia, where I met these people who were starting a school and who were also raising 30 orphans. The school was primarily for those orphans, but they also had other students coming in. So all those steps that I've just described to you didn't really involve sacrifice, because going to Cambodia for me was an adventure. Going to Korea was an adventure. And I respond to need. If I see someone who's vulnerable or abused, I want to do something about that. But living in Cambodia for 13 years provided the backdrop where God began to strip things from me that I held dear in order for me to surrender to him totally. I didn't have much money at first, and I began to foster Cambodian children. And I constantly encountered situations where people were hit by tragedy and desperate poverty and would come and ask me for help. The police and the government are corrupt. You can't depend on them at all for help. If you're the victim of a crime, you don't go to the police, because the police will ask you for money and then probably do nothing. We had situations at my school where there was family violence, mental illness, suicide attempts, crimes, and death, and there were no government agencies to call on for help. So the staff and I at school, we had to try to solve those problems by ourselves. One of Luca's classmates a few years ago was out riding on his motorbike and he was hit by a cement truck and killed, and the family wasn't notified. And so they spent probably 10 hours searching for him, going to all the hospitals until they finally found him at 2 a.m. So those kind of things, because I'm a person that likes to be in control, those kind of situations that were not uncommon began to be really stressful for me. I started having trouble sleeping at night, and I found myself getting really angry at the Cambodian government or at people who would take advantage of me or steal from me. And I got to an emotional low point after about 5 years. I came home to the States that summer and I just had dengue fever. And I remember thinking that it would be a relief if I could just die. I didn't want to kill myself, but I thought if I could just get hit by a bus, that would be so awesome. I could just go to heaven and be finished with this ridiculous life on earth. At that point I prayed and I said something like, okay, God, because I was, like I said, I was at a low point. I was just tired, exhausted emotionally. And I said, God, if you want to take everything and everyone from me, go ahead. I'm ready to just let it go. And I'll still praise you, because you are God, you made me, and you can do what you want with me. And at that moment, I just felt such peace and rest. Surrendering to God is an ongoing process, and I still take things back and try to do it myself, and then have to turn it back over again, but it gets easier each time, because I remember what that felt like when I did that so completely at one time. I think in America we have this idea that we can control our own destiny and that we can prevent bad things from happening, and then when they do happen, we get angry at God, we doubt, we say, how could a loving God allow this to happen? For me, going all in was easier once I accepted the fact that God created me. Just like if you were to have a pottery class and you made a bowl, that bowl would be yours to do whatever you wanted with it. The bowl wouldn't complain, right? Whatever you do, you're the maker. So once I accepted that God created me for His purposes, and that might not necessarily be what I think's best for me at the moment, but will ultimately work together for good, then it became much easier to die to self. And that's what surrender requires, is dying to self. And that can be incredibly hard. And depending on how stubborn we are, incredibly painful. But it's also incredibly rewarding and freeing. Because once we trust Him completely, much of the fear and the anxiety and the stress over all the events in our lives that are out of our control are gone. So it's actually an easier place to be than when we're trying to hold on so tightly to things that we can't control. So that's my journey, and I've just told you a very little bit about Cambodia and what that's like. So I wanted to leave a little bit of time for you guys to ask questions if you want to. And I also have a book here that I'm going to leave with Emily that has some pictures. There's one especially in here of the school that I think you guys would be pretty surprised at. So I'll leave it here for you to look at, and then Emily can bring it home later. Yes.
What was the moment that caused you to go from lukewarm and questioning to totally all in? What was that moment?
It wasn't actually a moment, it was a series of steps that took place over years because I'm an incredibly stubborn person.
What is the amount that an average family in has?
That's a great question. So salaries, like teachers, I said, make about $40 a month, right? Well, that's not a livable wage. A decent salary for a Cambodian, and it depends on whether or not they're single or have children or family, but a single person can live fairly well on about $250 to $300 a month. Mm-hmm.
This might be really hard. What made you know that it was Cambodia that you were called to and not Korea or any other country?
Well, I didn't feel called to Korea. That was just an adventure. But once I got there, I took this missions course that was called Perspectives, and it was about changing your perspective to see that we're all called to be missionaries. We're all called to bless other people, right? So that was kind of the starting point for me. And then I heard a missionary come and speak, and my heart was touched at that point. And then when I went to Cambodia for that week, and I've moved around a lot, I've traveled a lot, and I've said hello, goodbye a lot in my life. But when I went to Cambodia for that one short week, I just broke down and wept the day that we left those children. And my heart was just broken by it. And so then like I said, I began to share, and other people were praying for me. And I just had people volunteer, we'd love to support you. And then the day I had to make my decision that I had to tell my principal whether I was returning or not, I asked God to give me 2 more supporters. And that night, a friend called from the States, and she agreed to support me, and then 1 more. Yeah, so it was really, the Lord really made it really clear.
So how many years have you been living in Cambodia?
13. And would you tell me when our time's up?
Yeah, sure.
How'd you feel about coming back?
I did a lot of reading because for a long time Christians were just kind of silent in response to evolution theory, but there have been some books written by some really smart people, physicists and other scientists who have gathered some pretty strong evidence to refute evolution, or at least, I don't know if I'm sure you've studied this in school, but I don't think Christians would argue about the fact that there's been evolution within species. But there's no fossil record of evolution between species. So I read a lot of stuff that began to help me kind of have some ammunition to fight back against those theories that were sort of anti-God.
This might be a little bit off topic, but do you have any thing we should know to how to be all in?
Well, in the discussion questions that I gave your youth leaders, I just wrote down what I did. And it kind of depends on where you are, and you'll get into this in your discussion group, but I have some recommendations of things to pray. So you'll talk about that, I think, in your small groups. Yeah.
What's like a
Daily life or an average. What's their daily life?
Well, women are sort of in the barefoot pregnant era still in Cambodia. So they're not, a lot of them have to drop out of school and stay home and work, help the family work, take care of smaller children. A lot of them don't finish high school, so life isn't so great for women there.
So then
They're-
for you, what's your daily?
Mine,
Yeah.
well, because I'm teaching, I'm
Yeah.
really busy at school.
Yeah.
And then, so I do, at my school, I'm the librarian, and I kind of fill a variety of roles. It just kind of depends on what positions are didn't get filled for the year. So I'm doing librarian, I also do some counseling, and I teach a couple of classes. And then I come home and I take a bath and eat dinner and practically fall into bed. I'm 54 and I'm kind of old to be doing all this. Yeah.
What language do this?
It's called Khmer. It's actually spelled Khmer, but the R is silent.
So do you speak it through well?
I speak it passively because I don't use it a whole lot because I teach in English. You want to hear something?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just give you the standard greeting and ask you how you are. Chumrip sua, sok sabai te?
What's life like for you in Cambodia? Like, does everything that happens in that country affect you?
Well, I used to read the newspaper every day and I stopped that because it was I'd get too mad. There's just, the country, I'm sure you've heard about other countries like this. Haiti's probably the same. It's just very corrupt. The poor, because of their religion, which is Buddhist, in the Buddhist religion, they believe that whatever you've done in this life will affect your next life, right? So if you're a good person in this life, you're going to have a good life next time around. If you're a bad person, then you're going to have a sucky life next time. So basically, I had heard a pastor say one time, a Chinese pastor, if a Chinese person walked by a pond and saw someone drowning, they would not intervene. Because that person must have deserved that. That must be their karma. And why would you mess with what the gods have ordained? So they're very passive. They don't care for anybody outside their family. So yeah, a lot of that's very frustrating to me as a Westerner and a Christian.
Are there any particular cultural barriers you've had to overcome?
Lots. I've made a lot of cultural mistakes. One thing I've learned, which has been really good, I really like this about Asian culture. To get angry and to yell at somebody is to totally lose face. You embarrass yourself when you do that. So they just say what they want and then they just stand there and wait. And very calm and it works. Well, you guys asked some great questions, and thank you for being such good listeners.
Thanks so much.